Hi everyone, it's Kai from WCC, and today we're going to talk about the 3 best things that happened to Vanguard, and 3 of the worst things that happened to Vanguard. In my opinion, of course, so we'll start off with the 3rd worst thing to have happened. And this was actually a hard choice for me. I know, like, the 3 best things that happened, and I know 2 of the worst things that happened, but the 3rd worst had a lot of the little annoyances that it was just, little gripes like Persona GRN flips, which costed like crazy amounts of money, ultimate stride power creep, and like generation break as well was just a super lame mechanic on things that weren't grade 3 or higher. But in the end, I settled on Gize. Now, Gize was a part of the best formats of Vanguard, GBT14. At the beginning, it was considered to be like an underpowered deck, but over time, that meta evolved, and overall, it was just became a really legitimate deck that had some really good matchups. The problem was when Gize kind of overstayed its welcome, and the deck slowly became more and more consistent. Now, V-Era Oracle upped the consistency and overall defense of the deck, while counters to the deck were just usually not very consistent at all. Like, an example will be Gear Chronicle relying on Mystery Freeze Dragon. You just flip bad and look, GG, right? The worst part of this is that the deck itself was just inherently easy to play, so you could just give it to anyone, give them a quick prep talk, and they just had to flip triggers and win. So it was really unfun to play against as well, because you would never get much damage to do any of your own effects, and again, if your opponent got lucky, there's just nothing you can do. So yeah, it's lasted all the way until the end of the year pretty much, before a power creep kind of removed it from the game. When things like Gold Paladin came out, yeah, bye-bye Gize. Moving on to the 3rd best thing to happen to Vanguard, Legion. Alright, Legion was probably the most Australian set in Vanguard, but also was a catalyst for Vanguard to be a less boring game. Prior to Legion, card effects were usually costed quite high, such as a CP2 for a tie or draw, and you could only really realistically play 3 of these abilities a game by factoring in like a heal as well. But Legion changed that as things started getting costed a bit lower, and the overall impact and power of the decks became higher. When your Vanguard was unboosted, it would still be hitting significant numbers, which made matchups against like Link Joker better, where you might not have a booster at all. Best of all, it made games longer, so you could have epic battles with super compressed decks. Even weaker clans at the time, such as Grand Blue, had an okay fighting chance where their game plan would involve some like milling their entire deck very quickly and going to Legion to make like that super compressed state as well. So Legion was also the shortest era in the game. It was only around 2 booster sets before officially moving on to the G era. But Legion as a mechanic would last all the way till something like GBT 06 or 7, because that mechanic itself was just quite good. They did get some extra support as well, like the best support like for like a Legion deck, Dragonic Overlord, the Cross, right, came at Generation Stride, and then later on like Ripples got a Legion, which we all know what happened with that. So yeah, in G-Era they still got a bit of support. It wasn't the focus, but it lasted for a long time, and it's kind of how you would expect a mechanic to kind of still be relevant after it's officially over, and then slowly fade out into like, mainly just strides. So really good mechanic. I love Legion. You should love Legion too. You should get your mates to play Legion, and yeah, Legion really good. The second worst thing to happen to Vanguard was a stride mechanic change. Now, fighting for first stride was a big and necessary skill to learn in the G era. Before, you could only stride when your opponent was at grade 3. So in order to get the first stride, you had to stay either at like grade 2 or grade 1 and fight for it. Especially if you went first, it was actually not always good to go first back in G era. Kind of different to how it is now. This created an interesting dynamic in the game where you had to decide if your hand was able to fight or if you had to give it up and let your opponent get the first stride. Other ways to fight included offering Sea Breeze to your opponent, so they could get a first stride at the cost of a CB2 and a generally weaker first stride turn, because Sea Breeze itself is vanilla. They'll be relying on other effects to make their turn better. Unfortunately, this also meant that there were quite a few decks that would totally deny you from even having the ability to stride at all. And in fact, 2 world championships in a G era were won by decks that didn't or rarely strided. And they were Ripples and 7 Seas Rush. So I can understand why they wanted to solve this problem of like cheese decks ruining G era, but the way they implemented and at like the timing they did it was just really not needed at all. They did this when V era became a thing. So then again, like V era cards are just naturally stronger and can just naturally discourage players from playing a grade 2 game. And then on top of this, with the addition of these cards, it adds to the depth of the early game as well, where you would have to understand your opponent's deck as well as balance, like carefully balance the risk and rewards of doing the play when you compare to like your opponent has V cards and they could be equally devastating as well, or devastate you so much that getting first stride doesn't mean much anymore. So instead of that, they just removed all of this stride mechanic, grade 2 gaming and all that, and we had Excel 2 Gold Paladins for a year. So, stride mechanic change, I disagree with. I think it was the second worst thing to have happened. The second best thing to have happened to Vanguard was strides. Now, strides gave a lot of clans really cool units that could heavily influence the game. In the beginning, when strides weren't as powerful, you had a legitimate choice to not stride at all, and instead use other effects such as Legion. As strides became more powerful, they could just heavily influence the game just by themselves, and just felt awesome, like striding this cool boss monster that looked really, really cool as well. And a lot of decks and variants and archetypes became at least casually playable because strides themselves are just strong enough they could just sometimes just carry the entire deck at the cost of kind of making all decks a bit samey. One of the subtle impacts of strides was the triple drive. Before, dying to a double crit at 3 from a twin drive was just unlucky, alright? It just happens. Dying to a triple drive at 3 became something like 10%, or otherwise known as a calculated risk. Right? Don't quote me on those numbers, but yeah, it became a calculated risk. Triple drive also made game plans a bit more consistent, as you were going through more of your deck in just one game. So triple drive, 3 cards. Twin drive, 2 cards. You're going through more of your deck, you see more of your deck, you get to... your deck overall becomes slightly more consistent. So overall strides are really awesome. I love strides, and yeah, G-era represent. Finally, the worst thing that happened to Vanguard was lock. Right? Now, I'm a Link Joker player, but I can kind of understand when a mechanic goes a bit too far. I remember when lock was first released in BT12, we had Nebula Lord Dragon who had a back row lock effect at CB2, and this seemed okay, right? Because you know, it felt slightly underpowered. CB2 was like a retire, it was like a draw. This doesn't actually plus or minus, like plus for you or minus your opponent. Just made it kind of an annoying slot that he couldn't interact with, but it was, you couldn't really lock front rows very easily. It was only more focused on that back row lock. But then one set later, we had Chaos Breaker Dragon. And then they introduced a Mega Lock a few sets later, so a major opponent couldn't play the game like one turn longer. And later on down the track, they introduced Hand Lock, and eventually Link Joker decks could just very easily lock all your opponent's cards without much fuss, and your opponent just struggled to play any semblance of a game. People just stopped playing against you in casuals or friendlies. They know you were taking out Link Joker, but come on guys, why are you playing Link Joker against your friends in a friendly? that's not a friendly thing to do. All right, they had to give everyone and everything and every clan resist or cards that specifically countered lock. You have effects that specifically target cards just to counter lock, because a locked unit is still a card. So they needed to do all that just to balance the mechanic. So overall, locking your opponent from playing the game is just super unfun at every single level, and that's why it deserves the worst thing that happened to Vanguard. And it's probably also why they don't bring locking your opponent's card out in standard yet. Alright. So moving on to a more positive note, alright? What tops G units and is the best thing that happened to Vanguard? G units that come out during your opponent's turn, otherwise known as G Guardians. G Guardians added so much depth to this game for like a game that has very little interaction in your opponent's turn, apart from just guarding, right? So G Guardian G Guardians came with effects usually, and that could let you interact with your opponent's card during your opponent's turn, like the Null Griffin. But it also made things like Generation Break somewhat more relevant, and they could add more like Generation Break 3, 4 on things, and it would just help you accelerate to that number, and it feels good, right? And you can do it during your opponent's turn too. So you can stride on flip and then just go G Guardian and bam, you have GB3 Ultimate Stride, something like that, right? So it gave you that extra option in the game. It gave players the option to guard, you know, based on the guard value. So G units, well, G Guardians would have more guard value, or just G Guard, just to get that superior positioning next turn. So let's say you rode to grade 3 first. Normally you'd feel really bad because you went to grade 3 first and you didn't get to stride. But now you get to G Guardian if your opponent strides. And that can put you in a good position for next turn, where you could have access to GB2 immediately and have a stronger first stride than your opponent. So yeah, that was really, it's just like this extra bit that you can consider. And it also created a meta where players had to really consider whether they really wanted to attack or not. Because when they attack, it gives your opponent the option to G-Guard. And this would lead to some really awesome games, as well as some like really cool outplays. So on the release of G-Guardians as well, the G-Zone was increased to 16 just to accommodate these extra cards going into the G-Zone. And also, that basically made so decks could be more stride focused and run more powerful strides than before. And it made you have to really think about what else goes into your deck, your G-Zone. So it's just added just so much to the game. If they added G Guardians to standard, I'd feel really good. Like, I don't care about strides per se, as long as you can get something like G Guardians. If they added G Guardians and no strides, bam, that would be amazing already. So overall, G Guardians made a huge impact to the game. They continue to do so in Premium, and pretty much is the best thing that happened to Vanguard. So yeah, that's all my opinion. Let us know in the comments below your top 3 and best, like top 3 best and worst things to have happened to Vanguard. Everyone, just stay safe, and see you all in the next video. Bye.